to all participants, and welcome to the International Lecture Series 1, our first ILS in this 2024. We are very delighted to have all of you here at this event today that will discuss about natural disaster, risk reduction, and resilient building. Let me introduce myself. My name is Diva as Master of Ceremony at this event. Firstly, I would like to welcome to the Vice Dekan of Financial and Resource Management, Bapak Dr. Insinyur Abdul Syakur, STMT IPU. Our honorable guest lecturer today, Professor Dr. Boris Braun from Institute of Geography, University of Cologne, Germany. Our host lecturer, Professor Dr. Wiwandari Handayani, STMT MPS. And the moderator, Mr. Konstantin Gesivius, M.Sc, who are joining with us this morning. Welcome to our beloved lecturer from Urban and Regional Planning Department, student of University Cologne, Germany, student of Urban and Regional Planning Department, and everyone who joining offline on Theater Room and online from Zoom and YouTube channel. Before we jump to the main event, please kindly see the event agenda for today. After the opening and introduction, we have opening speech from Vice Dekan of Financial and Resource Management, and then the main session that will be led by Mr. Konstantin. Then, followed by discussion and also the closing remarks. We are now continuing to the next agenda. That is to hear the opening speech from Vice Dekan of Financial and Resource Management of Engineering Faculty. Please welcome Dr. Insinyur Abdul Syakur, STMTP. Time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawala. La khawla wa la quwata illa billah. Rabbi syrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Good morning to everyone here. The Honorable Guest Lecturer, Professor Boris Braun, the Honorable Representative from the University of College, Germany, the Honorable Head of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Universitas Diponegoro, Prof. Wiwi, the Honorable Lecturers and staff, and to the beloved student. First, all praise to God Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala for giving us His blessing so that we can gather in this forum in a good shape. Second, I would like to show my utmost gratitude to the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, especially to Prof. Wiwi as the head of the department for conducting this marvelous event. I sincerely hope that this international lecture series will last long and can consistently inspire future academic to bravely take further step in their research and contribute to the development of science in Indonesia. Next, as the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Engineering, representing this faculty and Undip, I would like to welcome all the guests from the University of College, Germany. Welcome to Semarang, welcome to Universitas Diponegoro, welcome to the Faculty of Engineering. I hope that you can enjoy your trip here and gain valuable experiences that can be beneficial for you in the future. Then, Before we continue to our next agenda, let me present a short explanation about this faculty. This faculty, Faculty of Engineering, consists of 12 departments and 26 study programs. Precisely, this faculty has 12 undergrad programs, where of 4 of which are international classes, 8 master program, 5 doctoral programs, and 1 professional program for engineers. Universitas Diponegoro itself consists of 11 faculties and 2 schools, where the Faculty of Engineering is the biggest faculty among all of them. We have around 11,000 active students and have several international certification such as ISO 7025, ISO 45001, and ISO 21001. For the University of Cologne, Germany, please do not hesitate to contact us and collaborate with us. Our hand is open to all kind or possible academic collaboration between us. We hope that we can strengthen our relationship and become great partner in the future. Thank you for visiting Undip and Semarang. May Allah bless you all. And I ask permission to not be able to part in this event because there are other activities scheduled at the same time. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Oh, yeah. Before we go to the next agenda, we invite all of the participants here to take the documentary first. Please, Mr. Imam. Duduk.
Okay, smile everyone. Dikasih apa?
Okay, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Balon sampun.
Okay, maybe you can show your style or
Freestyle. Okay.
freestyle. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Thank you very much.
Terima kasih, Pak. Thank you, Mr. Abdul Shakur, for the opening speech. So without further ado, we will go to our main session. Lecture 1 is about social and economic impact of disaster in Germany. I handed this session to Mr. Konstantin, and please to Professor Wiwik, Professor Boris, and Mr. Konstantin, please come and sit on the podium. Thank you.
Okay. So I think I'm gonna stand up for this because sitting just doesn't feel right. So hello everyone. Very warm welcome from our side. We're very happy and excited to be here today, to be back in Semarang. I personally spent here quite a lot of time 5 years ago when I was still a master's student. So I'm excited to actually come back a few years later, bring a new batch of students from Germany with me to show them the city, to show them the beauty of the city, the welcoming part of UNLIB. So we're very happy to have organized this international lecture series today. The topic is about natural disaster risk reduction and resilience building. So these are topics that are very prominent in our studies in Germany. Also when we talk about Indonesia, our research that we do here. And as our lectures today will show, probably also from Boris in a minute, we will see that the impacts of disasters are worldwide, and thinking about how to deal with them, how to adapt to them is an issue that everybody has to think about, every community, every government. So I think it's very valuable actually to be able to today see the same story from two different sides and maybe learn from each other, get some new insights. But without further ado, I think we can start with our first lecture from Professor Boris Braun. Just as a short introduction, he is a professor for economic and human geography at the University of Cologne in Germany. He's interested in the interrelationships between environmental change and economic and social adaptation. He has studied environmental standards and global value change, the social and environmental impacts of extreme natural events, and conservation policy. More recently, his research has shifted to the issues of adaptation to climate change and sea level rise in particular. His research focuses on South and Southeast Asia, Australia, West Africa, and Europe. And with that, I will give to you, Boris.
Or maybe it's more important for your students to show That's funny. Thank you. So we're just waiting for the presentation because I prepared a couple of photographs for you and pictures that you can see the situation. Okay, this looks familiar. So let me start. I think I stand in the way for you, right, in the presentation. Maybe I can come over here. So I want to talk about basically about the economic and social impacts of natural disasters in our own country, in Germany. But I want to do this with an example, with an outstanding example of flood that we had in 2021 in the western part of our country, so in the most western part of Germany, bordering countries like northern France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And you can actually see it on the first slide, how it looked in many of these mountain range
valleys after the flood event in summer 22. That was mid-July 21, when the huge flood, when we had experienced a huge flood in some small river valleys in parts of Germany. And this was actually a shock for Germany at that time, 3 years ago, because the last natural disaster experience actually went back to 1962. So we had about 300 people dead in the flooding of Hamburg in the early 1960s. And 21 was the event with the highest death toll after that, so after 60 years. So it was a huge shock and created also images and pictures that went around the world at that time. And some of these pictures might be even familiar with you because they were in the mass media all around the world. And the world was actually rubbing its eyes because it was a technologically advanced nation, economy, totally overwhelmed by a natural disaster that was not big and huge scale, but was very devastating for some parts of our country. So these were the pictures shortly after the flood. A lot of line of destruction in a lot of mountain valleys in the west of our country. So I would continue with the next slide, please. Yeah, this was also, Tagesschau is an important news program in Germany, major news program in Germany. And these were all pictures that were dominating mass media almost worldwide for a couple of days in mid-21. Next slide, please. So this was only a short economic damage assessment. So 180 people died. Just a reminder, the last experience was almost 60 years ago with such a high death toll. More than 40,000 people either directly affected, that means their houses were destroyed, for example, or they were injured. So a lot of people were affected by this event. The estimations of economic damage, of course, are never completely exact, but approximately 30 billion euros and 60 billion euros for complete recovery after the flood. Then damages for buildings destroyed paid 20 billion euros, and railway lines were destroyed, another about 2 billion damage to infrastructure. So it was just a major event, not only because of the high death toll, the very high death toll that we experienced, but also because of the economic damage. But just give you a context. So what we don't have active volcanoes in Germany. We don't have major earthquakes in Germany. So Germany usually, compared to Indonesia, is a pretty safe country in terms of natural extreme events. So what we usually have is winter storms. We have some damage through storm events. We have flooding from time to time. But the highest death toll, if you calculate, are heat waves in midsummer. So we always have, in every summer, we have a heat wave, maybe 1 week, 2 weeks, dry, hot weather. And then we experience that especially older people die. So in 2018, 2019, and I think also in 2014, about 6,000 people died because of the heat waves. So if you calculate, much more people die because of heat in summer than of natural events like flooding or storms. But if you take a singular event, it was certainly the most devastating one. And also this death toll that can be high for summer heat waves usually affects people 75 plus, maybe even 85 plus. So older people die during these heat waves. Here it was right across the board. So every age group was affected basically by this event. So next slide, please. So what were the major reasons from the kind of the natural system? The first reason was certainly excessive rainfall on the 13th, 14th, and 15th of July. So it was basically concentrated on only a couple of days in mid-July. And we had massive rainfall, unusually high rainfall. That might not sound very much for Indonesia, but for our climate, which is usually much, much drier than Indonesia, it's a lot of rainfall. That means rivers have to take this water up. Our soils can't take this water up. The infrastructure is not ready for such high rainfall figures. So in actual fact, we experienced 150 liters precipitation in only 24 hours in mid-July. Usually we have about 50 to 60 liters for the whole month of July, and this was only in 24 hours. So it was a very rare rainfall event. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is for the weather station of Cologne. Cologne was basically in the middle of these damaged areas. They were basically to the southwest of Cologne and to the northeast of Cologne. And you see, this is the average rainfall pattern that we experience in Cologne. So it's 38, 50, 57, 54 millimeters, usually during these periods in a long-term average. So this rainfall was much more than what we normally experience. Again, not high in terms of overall precipitation in tropical zones, which are usually much higher, but for an ecosystem that is not used to actually deal with these rainfall figures. Next slide, please. So this is just a map of Germany, and the major area was affected. This is Cologne. We call it Köln in our language. And this was basically the area southwest of Cologne that was affected and to the northeast of Cologne. This is the long-term average, a map of the long-term average of rainfall. And you can actually see that the areas affected, especially areas west of Cologne, are areas that are usually drier than the rest of the country. So not only was this excessive rainfall, but it also came to an area which usually under average rainfall figures if you compare to the rest of the country. So we're talking about this area basically in this presentation. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this was kind of the situation at that time in mid-July. So we had a very slow moving summer storm system called Bernd. It's a male first name in Germany for this storm system. And the special thing with it was that it was very slowly moving. So because it was so slow moving from west to east, usually these low pressure cells are going from west to east over the European continent. But this was very stationary for a couple of days. Stationary pressure system with a lot of rain because it didn't move that quickly and not as quickly as we usually experience these low pressure cells to move across the European continent. So this very stagnant, this very stationary pressure cell was basically the main problem and was the cause of this excessive rainfall. Next slide, please. And this is just a map of these rainfall figures. The darker red it is, the more rainfall we experience, the greener, the less rainfall. And you see, it was basically the southwestern part of the country that was affected between the 12th of July and the 15th of July. And the major catastrophe took place in the night from the 14th or 15th of July. And so you see a very high concentration of this rainfall in parts of Belgium, in parts of northern France, and especially the western part of Germany through this very stationary low pressure system. Next slide. This is basically zoomed in. This is the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. So Germany is a federal state. We have 16 federal states. That's the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. And you see especially the districts in the western part of North Rhine-Westphalia and the bordering federal state of Rhineland-Palatinate were affected by these problems. Not only these high rainfall figures, but these high rainfall figures focused on a very small area, basically in some mountain ranges in the border area of Belgium and West Germany. Next slide. Reason number two, this excessive rainfall event came on top of a rainfall pattern much above average for the whole summer in 21. So what basically happened that the soils were not longer able to absorb this excessive water and with a very fast runoff into the river system because the soils were already saturated. They couldn't take any more water. And so we had a massive runoff into these river valleys. Next slide, please. And the third reason was the topography of the area, at least two major parts of this area. So these are medium-sized mountain ranges, not really high, maybe 500, 600 meters above sea level, not high mountain ranges, but very deep and valleys cut into these mountain ranges with very steep slopes. Basically, that meant the whole runoff of these slopes in these valleys went into the valley. The valleys are very, very narrow, not much space for the river to expand. Then also we had settlements in these smaller settlements, small towns, villages in the bottom of these valleys, and the water had no way to go because it was just a very narrow channel, and this was the major reason why that many settlements got completely flooded. Plus, there's a lot of surface sealing in the bottom of these valleys. Some of them are tourist areas, popular tourist areas. You have hotels. Some of them were wine growing areas. You have some industry in the bottom of these narrow villages. And that means the surface was completely sealed. And when you have a sealed surface, you know what happens. The runoff is even faster because you don't have a soil underneath that can actually take up the water. So narrow valleys, steep slopes, and settlements with a lot of high percentage of sealed surfaces were the major problems that have to do with the topography. And you could also say the settlement pattern in this area. But now I'll show you a couple of pictures, maybe then it's a bit more obvious what I'm trying to tell you. Next slide, please. This is basically the situation of one of these valleys. Is the R Valley. This was most affected valley at that time. And you see this is a typical situation. You have these mountain ranges, you have steep slopes, you have also slopes with wine. So this is a major wine growing area for red wine in Europe. And these slopes with wine, they couldn't take up that much water, so we have much lower evaporation than in the forest areas. So that means the runoff was excessive down these slopes. And you see the bottom of the valley is sometimes into agriculture, but very often it's completely built up and sealed. And then you could ask, where's the river here? It's really hard to find. It's a summer photograph a couple of years earlier that I took. The river is basically here, a very small river. Usually in July, it's maybe ankle deep. You can actually walk over, no problem at all. You can't even see it there. But at that time, the whole valley was completely flooded by this very, very narrow and small river called the R. Next slide. This is another situation taken in autumn. This is again the situation with these high, deep slopes, these vineyards, these wine growing areas, and then these sealed surfaces in the bottom of the valley. Next slide. So what did exactly happen? If we look at it a little bit closely. So we now know why the event took place, what the spatial context was, where this event took place. And now we try to dig a bit deeper in what actually happened. Next slide. This is basically a gauge station of this small river R. R Valley was not the only valley, but the most prominent valley in mass media report. This is, say, the gauge that we measured in this small river R. And you see it was already higher than average in summer for the days from the 8th of July till the 13th of July. But then you see this massive peak here. This was this massive rainfall event. So the river level went up very, very quickly during the day of the 14th of July, and especially between 7 o'clock in the evening and maybe 12 o'clock midnight to the 15th of July. And here the whole gauge station was washed away. So we don't actually know exactly the peak runoff of this river because the whole gauge station was destroyed by this high water level. But we have estimations that it peaked around 700 centimeters, where we usually have in average 20 to 30 centimeters gauge levels. It was here then all of a sudden 7 meters. Next slide. These were basically the districts affected all over Germany, and these were the districts of emergencies. You see, it was not only in this western part of Germany, also parts of Bavaria were affected, but a major problem took place here in only a handful of districts in the west of Germany. Next slide, please. This was also an iconic photograph, an image that went around the globe at that time in 21. What happened here? Again, it's very hard to see the river. That's another river system. This river is called Alft. The riverbed is here. Again, a very narrow riverbed, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 meters in width, with usual runoff figures. And then through this flooding, the river entered into a gravel pit. And then through backward erosion, this gravel pit extended into the settlement and destroyed many houses here in the suburb, more or less suburb of Cologne, almost in Alfstadt, Blessem. And I never imagined in my entire life that I will see ever such a picture in our country. So it was imaginable what happened there. See, the gravel pit was here, and then the water entered, and then through backward recessive erosion, this gravel pit worked its way into the settlements, destroyed one house after the other in the night between 14th and 15th of July. So this was probably iconic picture at that time worldwide, but certainly in Germany, because my generation never imagined that something like this could happen in our country, which is usually we would consider as technologically advanced. But here, the planning system totally failed. The gravel pit didn't have a real consent by the government. It was kind of half illegal, and then we were not able to control this process anymore, and backward erosion just happened without any control and without any possibility stopping it. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just a picture of this gravel pit. This was the original gravel pit, and then it worked its way through backward erosion into these settlement areas, destroyed many houses, and people died because of that. And again, this is the usual river. This is the flooded areas. You see how extended these floods were at that time. Next slide, please. Yeah, and these are only some pictures taken shortly after the flood, in the aftermath of the flood. This is the village Schuld, which was completely flooded at that time. And you see again, this is the river, and this whole area was flooded during that night. Next slide, please. It's again a picture here is the river R in its usual state, and this was the situation on the 15th of July. So the whole village, whole small towns completely flooded by several meters, submerged by the water of these small rivers. Next slide, please. Another picture of another area. You see all the water running into these houses and streets. Next slide, please. Another problem was that dams, artificial dams for drinking water, for energy, and also for flood protection actually, were destroyed. There was a major problem called Steinbach Talsperre, a small a dam that was built in 1930s already. And you see here erosion along the dam, and there was a major fear that this dam could completely collapse. And it would have created a huge wave, of course, a huge wave of water in the lower parts of this valley. But very fortunately, this dam stayed stable, so there was this erosion, but it was a way to actually control the overspill of this dam. So this would have been another second catastrophe on the first catastrophe, but luckily this situation could be solved by engineering, by good engineering work in this old dam from the 1930s. Next slide. So what was the impact and the failures what are the lessons learned that we can take from this event for disaster management? So I don't want to talk about the impact again, a little bit. We already talked about the economic and social impact. I don't want to repeat myself here. I try to look more on the political and management impact these events have, and that's also, of course, the major topic of our seminar today. So next slide. We'll first look at the communication. So we actually saw a communication disaster, you could say. So the problems that emerged were not communicated in a way that people were able to understand and actually base their behavior on the information they got. This is an old kind of communication model. It's not new, it's from the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s already developed in media science. So we very often find kind of a model, kind of a time model concept that we usually have in communication. These are again the days in July 21. This is the kind of a media attention curve, you could say. And this catastrophe was very much according to the global model, how these things work. So the first warnings that something could happen emerged around the 12th of July, because the weather stations, they knew that there will be heavy rain, that we have this stagnant low pressure cell over the European continent. And the first warning came. But the warnings were about millimeters of rainfall. But millimeters of rainfall didn't tell people much. It was not an information that my property could be affected and how it could be affected. It was just kind of a very abstract information on rainfall figures. Usually Germans are used that our rainfall is very evenly distributed over the whole year, so nobody cares and nobody knows. It's not a currency that people can work with, millimeters of rainfall. The man in the street can't deal with this information. So we had a lot of information, technical information about rainfall figures that we have to expect, but the translation into that something could happen because of this rainfall was not just there. So we had a very technical information which was not really connected to the information, what should I do? And how could my property be affected? It was just kind of an abstract, if you could say, scientific information that was going out. So this was one problem. So the forecast was there, but the information coming out of this forecast system was not in a language that people could translate this information into actual behavior, because they just couldn't deal with this information, or we say they were not able to transcode this information into actual behavior. Then the next, we should go back. The next phase was about the 14th of July, where the reports of first impacts came during the day of the 14th of July. This was kind of information: this village flooded, this small town destroyed, and so on. This, of course, was important. And then you see only after these reports on first impacts, the attention rate was going up, because a destroyed village is something people can deal with. You will understand what it means. You don't understand rainfall figures, but you might understand what it means that one village upstream was already destroyed. And then very typically, the next wave of communication is solidarity. So people are rubbing their eyes, wonder how this altruistic behavior all happens, and people help themselves and help others in a very altruistic way. So in a very individual society, that's always the same surprise that people are helping each other, which was a very positive story, of course. So solidarity in the society to help each other, mutual help during these times of crisis. And then very quickly, only after one more day, the blame game started. Whose fault was it? Whose fault was it that the information couldn't be understood? Whose fault was it that the planning was not right? Master planning was not very effective, so the riverbank, the buildings went much too far in the direction of the riverbanks, actually accelerating the flood events. So it was basically a game of blame. Whose fault is it? So the solidarity phase is usually very, very short. It's important, but then very often, after one day, people ask, whose fault is it that these things actually happen in the way they happened? And then only one day later, the attention level is actually going down. So obviously, communication is very, very important. And it's very important to keep up this kind of communication cycle for a long period of time and provide information in a way that individual people can decode it and transfer this into individual behavior. So next slide, please. And this whole disruption went through our party system, our political system. So we had the major parliament elections in Germany in September 21. So this was already in the midst of the campaign for the federal elections. And a lot of politicians actually stumbled over their failures during these times of crisis. Probably the most prominent case, Armin Laschet. You don't have to know him, and we already forgot him actually. But he was actually the leading head of the party, and we were quite certain in July, according to polls, that he will be the next chancellor after Angela Merkel of the Federal Republic of Germany. So you won't know him because he never got chancellor. He had maybe 2 seconds in his career. He was a very experienced conservative politician. And he was laughing during a speech of our president of the Federal Republic of Germany, of Steinmeier. In the background here, some of his assistants cracked a joke, and he was laughing in front of the cameras for 2 seconds. Totally killed his career. It's 2 seconds of mistake in these times of crisis, wrong behavior, totally killed his career. Anne Spiegel was another very prominent case. She was environmental minister in one of the affected federal states. And later, then after the parliamentary elections in September 21, she was our family minister, basically family affairs. And her career killed within a few seconds. 2 wrong emails she wrote in the night of the catastrophe when she was responsible environmental minister at that time. She obviously was more concerned how she looks at a press conference than about helping people in the affected districts. I don't want to blame these people. And don't get me wrong, I don't tell you that I would have been responded in a more responsible way to it. These people were just completely overwhelmed by the situation, a situation that they could never imagine before. They were never prepared for such a thing. And then 2 emails went out to her assistant. How can we look the press conference in a way that I look good in the press conference? Not actually dealing. When she actually dealt with the problem, she was very engaged, but that didn't matter. This one email just killed her career completely, and she has to step down as the family minister a couple of months later. Jürgen Föhler, also a very interesting character, a conservative district chairman, you could say. He that later came to the media that he was more concerned to drive his Porsche sports car to higher ground than to sit together with the disaster management board to take decisions. And of course, killed his career. You can imagine how quickly this happens. So to see on a district level, on the level of federal states, another prominent case was Ursula Heinen-Esser. She went to vacation during these days. She was the responsible minister in North Rhine-Westphalia. And later it turned out that she visited a Spanish island, a Spanish vacation island during the times of crisis. And then she said, okay, this was because of my husband couldn't care for the children. I had to go back. Stupid stories. But a lot of careers killed. So it was an eruption in the whole political system that we experienced. Elections results on all levels were actually affected by this experience of a couple of hours in the night between the 14th and the 15th of July. Next slide, please. And what turned up is this was a police night vision was done by a helicopter of one village in the Ahr Valley, and you see already at 10:30 p.m. these villages were already flooded. This was exactly the time when Jürgen Föhler took his sports car to higher ground without caring about his people in his district. Again, don't get me wrong. In these times of crisis, when you can't expect something happening like this, we would all fail in a way. But I mean, as a politician, you should be prepared at some stage to deal with these problems. As I said, it was not only the death toll, it was not only the economic damage that happened, it was also a kind of massive eruption in the political and party system in our country. Next slide, please. Then another problem was communication during the humanitarian operations at that time. So this was an online survey of voluntary rescue workers that were working in the aftermath, directly in the aftermath of this flood event. And the question was, what was the flow of information during your operation? And you see only very few said very good, some said good. A lot of them said poor or very poor. This looks like a medium result, but you would expect that in such a situation where every minute, every second counts, information flows should work. And therefore, these not more than negative assessments probably also kind of a warning sign. So there was rescue personnel that was not able to come to these areas because roads were blocked. Then electricity was down in many areas. The internet was down in many areas. Mobile phone networks were down in many areas. It was very hard to coordinate this rescue work. And at some stage, we had more rescue workers, but the rescue workers couldn't work because they didn't have the information where to go to and where their work was actually needed. Again, a country like Germany was not prepared for such an event. Next slide. And this, unfortunately, it's in German, but we don't have to go into details. That is basically a very simplified diagram of the natural disaster decision-making system in Germany. And then you see that a federal state has many advantages. What I would convince that a federal state like the Federal Republic of Germany is a good way to organize state affairs, government affairs, because you have governments on different levels. Basically, we have a three-tier government system. We have the districts or the city governments. Then we have the governments of the 16 federal states. And then we have the national or central, or what we call the federal government. And so information went down, up and down these different tiers of government. So there was a major board for disaster management, which gave information to these disaster management boards on at a district level, at the federal state level, and at the national level. They had to communicate in between all of a sudden you have a lot of interfaces for your data. And this complex system, which was thought out theoretically, didn't work at a time where we had to rely on it. Then you have, say, depending on the level of the disaster, which other actors come into play. So all of a sudden you have a lot of stakeholders that are involved, and you have to guarantee that the information flow and the data exchange works between these different levels and between these different levels of help organizations and stakeholders. This didn't work. So it was a disaster in communication, partly because it's such a complex system, which might work theoretically, but didn't work at that time. And the second is because it was too much reliant on technical information exchange. And when electricity is down, when your mobile phone network is down, when you don't have an internet anymore in many areas, then these technical flows of information were just not able to cope with the problem. Next slide, please. And there's again another depiction, very, very simplified, but you see it's always a relatively complex system covering a lot of levels of decision-making and covering a lot of actors and stakeholders that are involved in these kind of processes. So basically, the information interfaces didn't work. What also wasn't working was the siren system. So Germany had the siren system that dates back to the Cold War before 1989 and 1990. Because of the fear of Russian attacks at that time, there was a very elaborate siren system, but the siren system was completely out of order at that time. There were long political plans to actually rework the siren system, that means acoustic warning systems, but this was just in the process of being something that could be solved in the future. So nobody cared. So our siren system, which was during Cold War times a very functional system, didn't work for this disaster. And also all the apps and the mobile phone applications were still in the way of developing them, but they were also not effective when we actually needed them. So you see, just carelessness. Nobody was thinking about such a situation. We were very careless with the information, the transmission of information along these chains and between experts and men in the street who then should decide. Another problem, and I think that's different from Indonesia, in our schools, there's not much teaching on how to behave in times of floods or storms. So we have them. And we learned in Sumatra, and probably it's the same in Java, that actually in school, especially in geography classes at school, you learn about how to behave. The German population didn't know anything about how to behave. So we have many cases where when the flood already was coming, let's say they saw the flood in the street next to them, people went into the basement of their houses just to collect family pictures to save them, their family history. Also something very understandable, and they're drowned in their own house, in their own basement of their house, because it was completely the wrong thing to do, but people just didn't know. So communication failed during the disaster, also in the aftermath of the disaster, but long before the disaster happened, communication failed because people were just not in a position to decide what to do in these kind of situations. Next slide, please. So what problems became apparent through this disaster experience that we had in 2021? So one was, I already was talking about, is forecasting and communication. It was not that we have not good weather data, but it was people were not able to decode the scientific information into something which could actually lead to a better behavior in times of crisis. Second point, the self-help capacities of the population were only partly developed. People just through the wrong decisions. They didn't know how to behave. And it's also something, I think many Germans rely very much on the government. And that's not a bad thing. So government covers you, government organizes your life. You can actually put a lot of your personal risks to the government, and we have an insurance system, we have a functional state during normal times of the year. So people were not able to help themselves because they were too much waiting for the state helping them, but the state was not able to help them because the communication was not happening. So, and this is exactly, I say, difference between Indonesia and Germany, that maybe, I would guess that Indonesians are much better prepared how to help themselves than Germans are, because they mostly rely on the state. And their lifelong experience was that the state covers them. But in this situation, the state was not able to do that anymore. Then coordination between different government levels was not effective. That's something I showed you with these diagrams, because the system is so complex. You have so many interfaces of information that it was very hard to get all on board, that everybody had the information they needed to decide the right thing. Then failure of political decision makers at all levels of government. All these politicians that stumbled over this responsibility, they were obviously not able to fulfill. So individual failure of decision makers, very strong part of it, because decision makers were not able to deal with the situation. Next slide, please. Then again, the poorly developed warning system. Sirens not working, mobile phone apps not working, just in development. We were completely unprepared for such a situation. Next point, high dependence of technical infrastructure. So the whole management system, flood management system, disaster management system relied on technically transferred information. There was no redundancy in the system. So we were just relying on an optimal technical solution. And we have one problem in this technical solution. There's no other way to deal with the problem, because you're so reliant on the technological fixed approach in disaster management. So, and then we were not able to deal with the situation anymore when technology failed. No redundancy is the system. A very unredundant system where one failure would affect the whole system of data exchange. Then the data exchange, a technical problem, the interfaces were not there to transfer information from one level to the other, from one stakeholder to another. And the last point I want to mention is the poorly communicated, overly bureaucratic relief funds. So this was basically in the aftermath. So there was a communication disaster before the flood, during the flood, and even after the flood, the communication disaster continued. So when politicians went there into this area, some were not present, but some were, and they went to these areas, they promised the population very unbureaucratic help. So this was the political communication. Experience of people was it got very bureaucratic later. So they had filled out extended forms about their damage. It was very, very bureaucratic. And don't get me wrong again, it has to be bureaucratic. But you have this, because you have the situation that some people have private insurance against floods. They paid a lot of money every year for insurance. Other people were uninsured. They didn't pay anything. They traveled to other places, they bought expensive cars, whatever what they did with this money. Can you deal with these two groups in the same way? Probably not. Because if you saved a lot of money for your insurance, you should be in a better situation than someone that didn't care about it. Should the state compensate for all these problems? Is that fair? Probably not. But if this is not fair, you have to treat these different groups in different ways, then it gets bureaucratic, because then you have to decide on the basis of very individual information. So I don't care about this bureaucracy. Maybe this bureaucracy was necessary. The problem was another problem, that politicians in those situations standing there with gumboots in the water promised everything. What we call in Germany, the blue from the skies. Everything works, no problem, we will compensate very quickly. And then later, people experience this as an extremely, and rightly so, bureaucratic process. So again, a miscommunication between politics and then real administration. Next slide, please. So what were the lessons learned? This was a diagram of some colleagues of mine from the United Nations University, and also from the Technical University of Cologne. And they drew up these diagrams, what we could learn from this. We can't go into detail. So I just want to say something about the headlines here. And with the next slide, please, and the next number of slides. So one priority is, I think, really better understanding of a disaster risk. So to develop a kind of a culture of a risk culture, that people know that risks exist and they know what risks are and what actually risks means for them personally, for their property, for their life, for their family, and not only on an abstract level. So this is something that you have to do before the flood. You have to prepare people to be prepared for such a situation they could face in the future. Next slide, please. Second priority is strengthening of disaster risk governance, to get the governance system right, do the right things in the situation where they are necessary. That would mean training and organizing voluntary helpers of these humanitarian organizations. This is also something what you have to have in place before the disaster actually hits. Next slide. Then in investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. So resilience seems to be a very important term. And that actually also means you have to duplicate systems. So if one system fails, you have a fallback options. And that was not happening in 21 in Germany. So when the technological fix approach came to its end, there was no other way to communicate what was necessary to communicate. So getting all these different levels of government right, getting the communication right between different stakeholders, humanitarian organizations, the police, the military that helps in a very severe disaster, all these communications flows should be prepared in beforehand. And this is just investment, financial investment, investment in technology, but also and probably foremost investment in knowledge of people, self-help capacities of people. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is the fourth priority in enhancing disaster risk preparedness. And this is what we always telling all the time. It's too late to wait for disaster to happen. You have to have it in place beforehand. And this in a democracy, that's not that easy to achieve because you have to spend money now that might be useful in 20 years' time. And our politicians are in office for about 4 years, so they have to invest now from taxpayers' money, push these decisions through parliaments, getting majorities in parliaments for something that's only the cost of today for the advantage you might get in future, when another politician, the next generation of politicians will be responsible. And that's hard to do. Maybe that's even a disadvantage of democracy with relatively short periods in office for many politicians and many responsible people. And this is not that easy to organize. So that's also kind of a systematic problem that we have to deal with, this long-term perspective. And see, when such a disaster happens every 60 years, we'll do a lot of investment for something that might actually then you can get a profit from in 60 years' time. That's not easy to do. And that's also might be a difference to Indonesia, where the frequency of these events is much, much higher. And you might have a volcanic eruption, an earthquake every 2 years. People stay trained, and everybody understands that it makes sense to invest in all this. This is difficult in a situation where you have these major disasters, but you have a long time span between these individual events. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this was the situation a couple of months after the flooding. You see it is still destroyed, and still the road network doesn't really work in this area. Still the train network is down. Julian, when was it? 2027, the railway line will reopen again. So this would then mean 6 years later. So there's still all the railway bridges are destroyed still. So it's a lot of investment in the aftermath. And you see this bridge still isn't there. That means also rail transport, road transport is still very limited, very restricted in many of these areas. Next slide, please. This was also about 1 year, half a year later after disaster. This was kind of piles of waste lying around everywhere, rubble from these buildings. They had to be put away. So there's still the whole area still dealing with this problem still today. And the transport lines are still down. Next slide, please. This, for example, was a broken railway bridge because of this flood event. And that's basically the river, how it looks in average times. But at that time, the flood level was about here. Next slide, please. Yeah, still the shops are not reopened. There's still also a problem for retail trade to come back to these areas. Next slide, please. Then the last question I want to cover is, was the flood in 21 an indication of climate change? And the easy response would be no. You can't an individual event doesn't prepare enough information for projections into the future. It was just a very singular event. Next slide, please. And it was not the first flood these areas ever experienced. So some of my colleagues from physical geography, they try to trace back the flood events in these mountain ranges in the west of Germany back to the late medieval times. Of course, only measurements maybe up to the early 20th century. Then it was basically written records they used for this estimations. But you see, I mean, we had flood events quite often in many years. We even had comparable flood events in 1804 and 1910. So obviously about every 100 years, such a flood happens in these areas. And they were able to trace back about 70 flood events in the last 500 years. So this was not really a singular problem. It's a kind of a situation that doesn't happen too often, but we had historical experience, it can happen before. The interesting thing was that in 1804 and 1910, we had approximately the same rainfall figures that we had in 21. But the water level in these valleys was much, much lower. Even so, the natural system didn't change. There was no indication of climate change. And the researchers that did this research even say that we can't see a signal of climate change in it. But every time the same thing happens again, the damage will be more. Of course, because people become richer and you have more economic damage just because people got richer. That's usually a good thing. They have a better life. But the other point was that the riverbed was narrowed over time by bridges, by railway bridges, by road bridges, by buildings going closer and closer to the riverbed. So the actual cross-section of the river narrowed down over time. And this led to a situation where the flood level was much higher. It's the same amount of water that the valley has to deal with compared to 1804 and 1810. And that's obviously a failure of spatial planning, of transport planning to a certain degree. So these bridges, transport infrastructure, very good thing to have it, to have railway, to have road access, very good thing. But the problem is the cross sections gets closer and closer, and then cars, roofs of houses, parts of houses actually blocked the stream underneath these bridges. And then, of course, the water level was much higher than before industrialization in 1804 or shortly before World War I. So the damage is much, much higher. But we should be very careful to say this is climate change, because the natural system was pretty similar 100 and 200 years ago. But the settlements and the built-up spaces in these valleys changed, which not only led to more damage, economic damage, but also to a much, much higher flood level with the same situation from a natural perspective. Next slide, please. So individual events don't really count, but we are, of course, could expect more flood events in summer in central parts of Germany due to climate change. We didn't see the climate change signal too much if we go back in history, but the future, of course, can be different from the past. And we have to be prepared that climate change will produce more and more flood events, especially during summer. But, and it should be my last sentence, it's obviously also a matter of spatial planning, to keep riverbeds open, to protect valley floors from complete sealing and settlements and road and infrastructure is a very, very important part. And therefore, I think it's also for regional and spatial planning, for geography, for regional and urban planning, a very important issue, because exactly the wrong planning created the disaster in the first place. It was not so much the climate change in the natural system. We had a situation before, but we never had that massive damages. And this was because of poor planning, not only communication, but also spatial planning. Next slide, please. Yeah, and therefore I want to finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Boris, for this very insightful presentation. So I think this event that took place in Germany a few years ago really showed us a very bitter lesson that we had to learn, that the German government, the local governments, the population were not prepared for such an event. And it really showed us a lack of communication, of carelessness from the authorities to deal with such situations, to problems in self-help capacities in the population, and really that came as a shock to German society, because what Boris already said is that self-view in Germany will be, okay, yeah, we are a technological advanced country, and usually the population can just rest easy and trust in the government and authorities to deal with such situations. Even if there are floods happening, if there are some disasters happening, usually the impact would be very, very low. And so this was the largest disaster that happened in the last 60 years, and it was a very high price to pay to have these lessons that we had to learn. Really showing that it is not, countries like Germany or in Europe are not entirely protected from these kinds of disasters. And there's still much to learn also from countries like Indonesia, where there's much more experience, especially in the local authorities and also in the population, just how to deal with such situations on themselves, because that is something that is really lacking in Germany up to this day. I think we'll have a discussion and questions on the presentations after the second lecture as well. So if there are no... Yeah, okay. Okay, so we will do the questions after the second lecture as well. Then moving on in our program, we'll have our second lecture now on building climate change adaptation and resilience in the Indonesian context from Professor Dr. Wiwandari Handayani, to give a short introduction. She's a professor at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, the Faculty of Engineering at Diponegoro University. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in urban and regional planning at UNDIP, master degrees in urban and regional planning at ITB and population studies in INU, Australia, and holds a doctoral degree from the University of Stuttgart, Germany, most beautiful city in the world, where I come from as well. Her research focuses on urban and regional resilience, mostly in the context of disaster risk management, climate adaptation, and governance. She actively involves in works related to urban region sustainability and resilience since 2011. She was in the team of Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network Rockefeller Program in Semarang City, performed as M&E coordinator for several projects implemented from 2011 to 2014, and Deputy Chief Resilience Officer of Semarang City since 2015, and also head of department, from what I heard. So please, Vivek, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Konstantin. Since you stand in this side, so to keep the balance, I will. Yeah, I hope you still have concentration. Yeah, I think I will try to make it short. Hopefully, I can manage. And before we start, please allow me to welcome you all again, particularly the students from Germany, from Cologne. Please pronounce in German way, Cologne. 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 Cool. Welcome to Indonesia. Welcome to Semarang, and I hope you enjoy the city. Anyway, I know maybe yesterday is quite hot, right? You visit the coastal, and I know that you took the boat to see the mangrove. I hope it was like a nice experience despite the the heat, yeah. And yeah, another thing that I would like to mention before I start my presentation about the climate change adaptation and resilience, I really impressed with Pak Boris' presentations, because I don't know, for as an Indonesian, yeah, let me also say hello for our Indonesian students, also participants online. For most of us as an Indonesian, we mostly think Germany is related to the good technology, right? In Indonesia, something made from Germany certainly very expensive, right? No? Yeah. yeah, very famous, like with the BMW and Mercedes, and it's really interesting for me to have your presentation showing that you have some issues also with technology, mostly when you share your experience with the disaster 2021, and I think it's very relevant with my presentation about the resilience itself. So if Pak Boris mentioned a lot about disaster and disaster risk reduction, I will try to bring some insight, mostly in the context of climate change adaptations and resilience in Indonesia. Next, please, Mas. Yeah, I will try to start briefly with the climate change, why it is really an issue or a matter in Indonesia, and move into some very short concept about adaptation and resilience. And through this presentation, actually, I would like to bring our concern and put the highlight that for us, mostly in Indonesia, there is a big conversation on how to promote resiliency, mostly related to such climate change disturbance, by promoting what we call as nature-based solution or blue-green infrastructures. Because maybe you have been so far, you've visited Sumatra, right, to Padang and then other cities. I don't know whether you have realized that we have a lot of infrastructural big project, including the toll road and so on. But then maybe we need to also see and critically think or consider the need to balance those gray infrastructural work with some more blue and green with more sustainability value on it. Next, please. Yeah. Next. Yeah. Actually, just from this global perspective, this quite a complicated slide. But what I would like to show you or bring our concern again, even I know because you have been really aware with the climate change issues globally, that the emissions increase quite significantly from time to time since centuries ago. And we have experienced different extreme disaster, including that Pak Boris has shared in Germany in 2021. And it happens worldwide, actually, from different continents, like in Indonesia, for example. We have a big tsunamis event in the early 2000s. And even the loss and damage, it's crazy. You know, it's like thousands of people died and 100,000 even. So it's like a big event that also bring our attention on the importance of how we may deal with disaster management and how we improve our capacity in disaster risk reduction. And like it or not, in Indonesian context, when we talk about disaster, we are prone to various types of disaster. So maybe if you go to Sumatra or maybe also mostly in Java, we have different types of disaster related to mountain eruption. But other than that, we also have higher frequencies of disturbance comes from the water-related disasters. So in Indonesia, maybe flood can categorize as the most frequent disaster that happens in not necessarily in the coastal area, but also in the mountainous area. So you can imagine if you in campus of Undip, yeah, if you see the map, you will realize that Undip located in the relatively upper side of Semarang. So if yesterday you go to the coastal, it's on the northern, and now you are in the southern part. But even in Tembalang, you never imagine that we also experience flood. Yeah, so flood happens or water-related issues happens not necessarily also because of the climate change, like Pak Boris has mentioned, but also related to when we talk about spatial planning. Yeah, so I think it's really interesting if we can further discuss about how the phenomenon has been going on in most Indonesian cities. Next. Because when we talk about climate change, the impact will closely related with the urbanization happening in Indonesia. Urbanizations continues to increase and mostly occurs as the coastal cities along the coast, not only in Java, but also in the other islands. For those who comes from abroad, maybe you need to, it's interesting for me also to inform you that most of the Indonesian, I think almost 60% or even more, 60% live in Java Island. While the area of Java Island is only about 7% of the total land in Indonesia. So you can imagine how dense it is. Or maybe, I don't know how you fly from Padang to Java, but if you go through the toll road, then you can feel the difference, because we have a very high density in most of our areas, especially in coastal, and it's very big unbalanced situation, in terms of the population distribution. Other than that, most of our big cities located in the northern coast, here. So when we talk about climate change, disaster and disturbance, we have a lot of concern in most coastal cities in Indonesia, mostly in the northern coast of Java Island. So Jakarta, Demak, Semarang, Pekalongan, including in the East Java, like the coastal of Tuban and Gresik. So along the northern coast, categorized as the most vulnerable area in Indonesia. And I think it is also important when we mention about climate change, the situation worse not only because of the disaster, but also because of the cause of the climate change itself. It's about the emission. So it's also interesting if we can make an easy comparison, not to just to make the class more interactive. I just want to know, maybe one of you can mention from Germany how long on average you walk every day in your daily life in Cologne. Please. 3 to 8 kilometers on average you walk every day. So should I ask our students? You want to say something? How often you walk and how long? Yeah. How about the distance? Maybe even less than 1 kilometer. Yeah, big, yeah. Yeah. No, I just want to show you a simple, easy comparison that our habit, our lifestyle that used to go to everywhere using motorbike, contribute to the emission is also worse the climate change phenomenon. So when we talk about climate change in Indonesia, actually we cannot only focus on the climate change adaptation when we focus on the disaster because of the climate change, but also actually we need to focus on how to manage the city to reduce the level of emission or the climate change mitigation. Yeah, next please. So basically from the previous and this slide, what I would like to share to you all that I think the climate impact is quite obvious in most the coastal city, even though the flood is maybe not always necessarily happen because of the climate change, but also could happen because of other reasons, let's say like our behavior that we are still Indonesian, like throw the waste to the river, something like that is also produce like a quite significant inundation, and also poor drainage system, something like that. But on the coastal particularly, we can see various climate impact range from like I said, in the northern coast, the land subsidence happening quite significant. It become worse because of the the land subsidence. So from the seaside, there's like the sea level rise. And from the land side, because of the urbanization, the government allow the people to take water from the groundwater. So, and also the influence of the types of the soil, then we also experience land subsidence. Maybe you have known from your research area yesterday how the sinking, yeah, how fast it happens. You have some information yesterday from Mangunarjo? No? Yes, please. I see. No. You went to Mangunarjo as well, right? Now in Tambak Lorok, later on you will go and see another case. But yesterday you didn't have the information, no, because the area also experienced the sinking, but not as worse as the area that you will visit later on in the afternoon. In the afternoon, you will go to Tambak Lorok. The sinking level is the rate is about 20 centimeter per year. So you can imagine it will be about 1 meter every 5 years. Quite similar with what we have in Pekalongan, ya, Mbak Retno, ya. Yesterday, or 2 days ago, we just back from the sinking village from Pekalongan, and I think it's quite similar to the mark. So the worst, or on average, what we have been experiencing so far, the sinking level is about 20 centimeter per level, so per year. So it means the local people, they need to elevate the house like every 3 or 4 years at least. And of course, it takes a lot of money and so on. But other than the sinking event, we also have the forest fire and also the drought. So it's quite interesting when we see Indonesian case, we always experiencing what we call as too much or too less. So during the rainy season, we have a lot of water, so we experience flood. But during the dry season, then we some areas still experience the heavy drought, including last year. Yeah, I think in Semarang we experienced quite a long dry season, and some area becomes very dry. And especially with our agricultural area, it becomes a lot of issues here because we have like a failed harvesting and so on. And the climate impact, it's also include to the health issues. So dengue, is one of the the obvious impact because of the climate change. And I hope you don't get some attack from the mosquitoes when you are in Indonesia, hopefully. Us as Indonesian, we already adapt, or the mosquitoes is already boring with eyes, Indonesian skin. Next please. So next please, Miss. So considering all about the climate change phenomena and also the disaster that likely happen in most of Indonesian area, mostly in the coastal, and mostly we need to focus on the urbanizations issues that has been happening so far. Then climate adaptations comes as an important topic, but I think it's only start not more than 15 to 20 years ago. So it is like a new conversation in Indonesia, and it becomes more and more research and discussion and also policy on that only in the last 5 to 10 years. Basically, when we talk about the climate adaptation, is how then we need to adjust and how then we leverage our survival and how we then respond to the disturbance that maybe like Pak Boris has mentioned, how then it becomes an issue when the disturbance is, maybe next please, Mas. When we talk about the adaptations, it's not, maybe in this context, we mostly talk about the disaster that caused by the climate change. And as you can see from this slide, what I would like to mention that the sea level rise, the changes in the precipitations, temperature rise, and extreme weather, the phenomenon is already there in most of the northern coastal area in Java Island, and it influenced different sectors, including crop, industry, settlement, and so on. And then it brings more and more conversation in different sector, different ministry, different stakeholders to raise their awareness. Next, please. Yeah, actually, when we talk about climate adaptation, it will strongly related with resilience. That's why I would like to go back to what Pak Boris has mentioned. Maybe for Germany, the 2021 event categorized as shocks, right? Because you rarely experience this. Even I really quite surprised with the data that you have a very bad flood every 100 years, yeah, Pak Boris, yeah, once in this area, yeah. But maybe, and I believe that the frequency, I assume, maybe I could be wrong, but I assume the frequency in general is still less compared to Indonesia, yeah, I think. So when we talk about flood, maybe in terms of the resilience terminology, maybe for most of situation in German, we can categorize as shocks because you rarely face this situation. But for us in Indonesia, mostly if you meet the people who live in the coastal, they will categorize it as stress because they experience like every day. So you can imagine for the people who live in the coastal in Java Island, during the high tide season, they will experience flood because of the sea level rise. We call it tidal flood. During the low tide season, they also experience flood because of the flood comes from the upstream area. So for those who live in the coastal, they experience flood almost every day in their life. You can imagine that, yeah. And not necessarily only in the rainy season or in the dry season. And for this situation, when we talk about their capacity to cope with this disturbance, then yeah, it is not really a shock anymore for them. And surprisingly, when we talk to the different people who live across Java from the east to the west, nobody really want to move. It's very difficult for us or for the government to relocate them because they think that they are strongly embedded, yeah, with the location, especially for those who work in the fishery sectors. So relocation sounds like not an option. So we still discuss and argue how then we can categorize our situations, yeah, whether in the survive, adapt, or yeah, in the higher level. Yeah. Can we categorize these local people as they have faced this like in their daily life, so they have their new normality and they grow better with something that we cannot imagine, something like that. So I think if you go, Tambak Lorok is quite interesting because in Tambak Lorok, when you will visit later today, there are a lot of government initiative in this area. So I think the situation now is much better. I think you have been there 5 years ago, right? So you can compare and share your experience after 5 years. Yeah, after 5 years. Yeah. Next, please. Yeah. And of course, the conversation of climate change, climate adaptations, disaster risk reduction, sustainability, various types of hazards becomes like a very kind of interesting topic for most of the researcher in Indonesia, considering that we experience such a lot of disaster events more and more in the last decade. Next, please. Yeah, next. Yeah, I will give you, I will not take, it won't, I will not explain this into the detail. I just want, before I give you some example in Indonesian context, I just want to show you a little bit about the concept of resilience, that actually when we talk about the climate change adaptation and resiliency, we should gradually move from the conceptual idea to the operational idea. And how actually we also, when we talk about the climate change resilience, we also to gradually move from the engineering resilience that we are mostly focused on the infrastructural work to what we call as socio-ecological resilience, where we also take into the consideration of the people and also the environment. And for that reason, then we need to improve the level of our response, yeah, from surviving to adaptation to transformation. So what I would like to show you after this is maybe some illustration and in how actually we have been dealing with a lot of disturbance, but mostly still in the level of the engineering resilience, that we focus on building more and more construction like dike and so on, but then actually it will not give like a long-term solution for us, and it takes a lot of investment to build such infrastructural work. Next, please. Yeah, and when we talk about transformative adaptation, I just want to recall some literature saying that actually there are like different characteristics should be taking into the consideration. Most not only focus on the technology or innovation in technology, but also how to include the local leaders. It's interesting for me to also take the lesson from the event in Germany in our valley, that you have you mentioned that the system is not redundant enough. It is like technological failure, right? And in Indonesia, then we come to the level and understand that we need to very much focus on strengthening the local people. So identifying local leaders, and there's national movement to strengthen what we call as the community resilience. Yeah, we have like Kelurahan Tangguh Bencana. So it's like local disaster preparedness group that should become the important group who will protect with their local value, not only very much depend on technology. Maybe it's a little out of context, but I think it's interesting for me to share our experience, like about maybe around 10 years ago when I am engaged in some project from the Rockefeller Foundation. They give the funding for us to build early warning system for the local people in this prone area. So we built like we use the technology. Principally, our colleague from the civil engineering, they built the technology. So they can just use their mobile and so on to warn all people. But the local people, they refused. They just want to use the kentongan. So please, Mbak, what is kentongan in English? Pak Roko, maybe. You know, in the kentongan is the local thing that you can use from the wood, like tuk 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 tuk, yeah, from from bamboos, yeah, Pak, yeah, to make the sound to give the early warning system. They don't really believe with all the technology, or even they want to optimize the use of the mosque, yeah, because most of them are most of us like a Muslim community, they have mosque, and in the mosque they have like the sound, and then they just basically they refuse the technology. So it's like an interesting lesson learned from me, how actually we need to identify the local technology, the local needs, and the local value. Let's move to the next slide, Mas. Yeah, so basically or conceptually, then in my research, I tried to further examine how have been, then we start to move our adaptations initiative and hoping in certain level we may achieve what we call as transformative adaptations. It means we have already take into the consideration the socio-ecological resilience, not only the engineering resilience. Next, please. Yeah. I also give one slide just to show you that in Indonesia, we also already have some national policy that set the target for the national achievement in adaptation and resilience. And nationally, the target is how to reduce the impact of climate change on national GDP by 4.5% by 2050. So that's the national target. And of course, the term of climate change and resilience already mentioned in the 2024 midterm plan that we just have the election. And I think it still become a concern for the next midterm plan in Indonesian context. Next, please. And in Indonesian policy, our climate change adaptation area in general divided into 3 areas of resilience. We call it as economic resilience, social and livelihood resilience, and ecosystem and landscape. Showing that actually through the policy, the government already tried to make kind of transformation, not only focus on building the physical construction, but how also to understand the local situation, how to protect the local people with their livelihood. It's really so touching for me. Like only 2 days ago, I went to Pekalongan and I visited local people. They work as the fishermen, and they live in the sinking area. Their house is wet, like almost wet the 24 hours of like sometimes it's sometimes it's high, sometimes it's just wet, but they don't want to move because they said, yeah, this is our life, and they said that I'm happy and grateful that and I just want to keep our livelihood as the fishermen, something like that. And that's why I think social and livelihood resilience become also very important pillar in our climate change adaptation policy. Next, please. And we also have some thematic planning to in the policy level, just to force the idea and the concept from the national to the local government, because in our decentralization era, actually, there are also an important role of the local government to initiate such as climate change adaptation initiative at the local level. Next. Yeah, next. Yeah. So this is like this kind of summary that I would like to show you. Why we have those kind of policy, why we need to raise our awareness on the climate change adaptations and resilience for Indonesian context, because we have several environmental concern in most of this is the northern of the Java Island. Like I've mentioned before, we experience the coastal erosion, tidal flood, fluvial flood, make most of the area is flooded almost in the whole all years period. Other than that, we also have water supply problem, land subsidence influenced by the urbanizations, landslide and drought. And next, please. This is only give you some situation. You will go to this place tomorrow, Tambak Lorok, and you can imagine this is Pekalongan. This is Pekalongan. Maybe the picture is too small, but only 5 years ago, I take this pictures like on Sunday, I don't know, and today is Tuesday, so it's like 2 days ago, 5 years ago, this mosque is still on the land area, on the land base, not sea base. And only within 5 years, It's already like this. Yeah, this is the most, and this is the kampung. Yeah, as you can see, maybe it's not really clear, but it's already empty because the people cannot live there. And again, and then the government helped to relocate them only to the next village, not too far from from the current area. And I think maybe in the next 10 years they need to move again. Yeah, so it's not really like a long-term solution for them. And this is more or less, yeah, the situation. And waste is also become an issue. This is waste, yeah. And this is also the sinking kampung. Yeah, this is in the Mak area. So this is more, and yeah, maybe you will see a lot more when you visit Tambak Lorok later. And next. And what we have been doing so far is there a lot of infrastructural work. You went to this place, right? Jatibarang yesterday. We also built the Mak Toll Road, double function as the toll road, but also as the sea dike, river embankment. And from this picture, what I would like to show is that because it's just like a flood phobia, I think, for most of the Indonesian government. So during the rainy season, we are likely to build a system that can process for the water to go to the sea a lot. Yeah, so this is what happened, and you can see also the quality of the water. But then during the dry season, we need more water because during the rainy season, we just let the water just go to the sea using the pumping system and such a polder system. And that's what actually what I've been mentioned to you. We have been so far highly focused on what we call physical infrastructures and require a lot of financial investment. And next, please. Yeah. And now, just only recent years, I think less than 5 years, I think there are more and more concern on how we combine those kind of physical construction with the nature-based solutions and how we combine what we call as like a hybrid, yeah, gray and blue green infrastructures that may provide or improve the ecosystem service and somehow provide co-benefit between mitigation and also adaptations. Next, please. This is some of the initiative that already been done so far in some area in the north coast of Java from the west to the east. Mostly mangrove plantation, pine trees. Yeah, it's like a very famous intervention to combine the gray and with the blue-green infrastructures. And it is interesting also that there are some local kind of knowledge co-production has been produced during the process. We call it as pegar. What is pegar, Mbak Retno, in bahasa? Pemecah gelombang ambang rendah. In English is low threshold breakwater, made from bamboo combined with some what is waring in English? Yeah, with something I don't know. I still forgot the name in English. But basically, this is like a local knowledge how they protect their sea to control the sea abrasion by using the local knowledge, using the bamboo and sand and some local product, and they call it as pegar or low threshold breakwater. And they also make a kind of local design how for them to protect their area, mostly their pond, because if you see here, this is their livelihood. Yeah. Most of them have fish. Yeah, the fish milk. Have you eat fish milk when you are in Semarang? No, I think you should eat fish milk when you are in Semarang. Yeah, only once. I think it will be okay. Ikan bandeng. You still remember ikan bandeng? You should invite the students to eat ikan bandeng. Yeah. Most of the people, they fish farmers, yeah, milk fish farmers, and they need to protect their livelihood, yeah, the pond, and they build what the mangrove in front of the pond, and then they build the pine trees to protect the area, and also and then at the front line they make the low threshold breakwater. So it is interesting for me to understand that this design comes from the multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary process. I mean, not really the initiative from government, but mostly from the people. And they talk with the different stakeholders, and they have this. And I think this is kind of, even maybe the scale is small, but showing a robust system, a lot of local value on it, yeah, rather than we only focus on the big project on gray infrastructures. And yeah, next please. So I think this is my last slide. As the conclusions from those that I've tried to share the experience in the northern coast of Java with you, that the first important things is how then we do not only talk about climate change adaptation at the conceptual level, but how we can make it at the operational level. And I think it's very important for us, how we can move from the engineering to the socio-ecological resilience. And I think at this level, after about 15 years doing research here and there, yeah, when I meet a lot of people and they always said, we don't have money, we don't have technology, blah, blah, blah. They always said money as the problem. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's very true. But at this level, I think it's not always really about money. It's not really about technology. But at the end of the day, I think to have a sustainable intervention with the socio-ecological lens, what we need is the people literacy and awareness. What we need is the importance of local engagement. And I think with that approach, then slowly, gradually, we have a significant progress to reach what we call as the transformative adaptation. And in my word, I call it as the resilience from the bottom or resilience from below. So yeah, with that, I would like, I hope that my sharing will give you some insight, and look forward to have a discussion with you all. Thank you very much. Give you back.
Yes, we thank you very much for this very nice presentation, this overview of the situation in Indonesia that our students already discussed for quite a bit in our preparation seminar and also during our travels now in Indonesia. But it's very interesting to see it again from a more conceptual level, to start with a very complex multi-risk environment that you find in Indonesia. That's flood and water are maybe the most prominent hazard, but there are also a lot of other issues that come into place that kind of cascade into very complicated situations. So as you said, like, for example, with rain, there's either too much or too little. So you have to deal with both extremes of that side. And also landscape science, which we already talked about a lot, and I'm personally very much looking forward to go back to Diponegoro to see the sites after 5 years, if it's really has been the meter. So I will look up some photos I took back then and see if I can see the distinction from there. And yeah, really the challenges of urbanization and also pieces of lifestyle just in Indonesia that really make this a very high risk environment. What we also find from our personal research that we conducted from University of Cologne, what you said is that we find a very high exposure of the people, but also a very high place attachment, that they do not want to leave the places they're living for different reasons, personal reasons, emotional reasons, but very often also economic reasons, that they want to stay in the places because they're fishermen, they need to be close to the coast. If they work in the industry, they need to be close to their working areas. And then really thinking about what can we do with the situation to lead to a transformative process of long-term adaptation where you can focus on different stakeholders, local leaders, for example, but also facing the challenges of such a large-scale transformation where you have to deal with local customs, local habits, and maybe find ways to integrate this local knowledge actually in transformative adaptation processes. And one way that one could focus on would be more blue-green infrastructure, nature-based solutions like the mangroves that we visited yesterday, to kind of not only have the protection from more great infrastructure like the dam that we also saw yesterday, but also to get a bit more of larger scale benefits that you also get from nature-based solutions, like for example the protection of the fish population through mangroves and so on. So yeah, thank you very much again for this very interesting talk. Now is the time for questions and discussions. And I think we can just give the microphone to the students who have questions. Yeah, okay. Isabel?
You talked about the local knowledge, and I think it's really interesting to talk about that because especially I think in our country, it's not a huge topic. It's always a lot of technology and the government that is dealing with it. So my question would be, if I understand it right, that the local knowledge is included on the smaller scale, but not so much on the larger scale. So how are the government and the local people are cooperating with the issues that are coming with climate change?
Should I respond directly? Okay. Yeah, thank you for the questions. Yes, you're completely right. So when we talk about the local knowledge, mostly we talk about the intervention in the very micro scale. And it's really need more effort to scaling up and also make some replications. Yeah, replications already been done, but not really scaling up because I think it's not easy to make a sustained collaboration between the local people and the government. Most of the issues, maybe our colleague here can add also something because also we have some expert here like Pak Ruko. Feel free if you want to add something, Pak Ruko. Pak Ruko also has a lot of research in climate change adaptations. But what I can tell is mostly government's people they change their position easily. So for example, there's Mr. A, they already have a good connection with the local people, but then only within months, he moved to the different section at the government agency. Then the local people need to deal with the new government employee again, and they need to start the communication again. And sometimes the local leader also, or the local decision makers also have a different interests or different commitment level. So based on those experience, I think the biggest challenge is how to ensure the sustainability. Once it is good, but maybe in the following years it's bad again, and then need to start all over again, something like that. Yeah, I hope it answers your questions. Thank you.
A lot of questions. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for the interesting presentation from both speakers. But I would like to ask to the first speaker, Prof. Boris. You present about the field of technology, and communication, based on the case of 2021 flood in Germany. Is there any change now how the way technology and communication are now used or to be optimized in Germany, or is there any discussion about that? That is my questions. The second question is about the question about 46% of ownerships in insurance in Germany, which may make that exacerbates after the disaster. Is it a good or bad number or bad coverage with that kind of percentage? Because maybe in Indonesia is much lower than that number. And I'm also wondering about the accessibility of flood risk map in Germany. Maybe the other 64%, which is not covered by insurance, are not located in flood risk area, for example. So it makes sense. 46% is already high number in terms of insurance. And what your impressions about that kind of situation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ram. Thank you, Ram. Thank you very much for your questions. Very interesting questions. Yeah, of course. There is a high percentage of people that are actually insured against not only floods, also landslides, for example, that happen from time to time. Yeah, we have flood risk maps. We could actually say that from the 1990s onwards, when we had first big river floods, like in the Rhine Valley and also later in 2002 in the Elbe Valley, this really changed the situation. But we were really concentrating or focusing on the big rivers. And what happened in 21 was not a big river problem. So the big rivers fluctuated only very marginally. It was more the problem of these smaller river valleys. And there we were relatively unprepared. So we could actually say in the bigger catchment areas of the big rivers, a lot changed since the mid-1990s. And of course, it's also technology helps, no doubt about it. So dams are its movable elements, production elements. So a lot of things happened from the 1990s, but not in these smaller river valleys. And I would guess it's the same situation. If a lot of people are insured in areas where they know they can be affected, but we were not looking at these smaller catchment areas. But that changes now, of course. I mean, there's a lot of investment now in technology, in information technology, in smartphone apps, for smartphone app systems to make information more accessible. But obviously, we needed these shocks in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, now in 21, to actually do something. And I think that's probably comes with democracy, and this comes with how we take decisions that you first need to shock and then we start to react. This insurance quota is obviously probably much higher than in Indonesia, I guess. It's certainly true, but it's very different between different federal states. So in some federal states, there's a compulsory insurance system, like in Baden-Württemberg, for example, where most of the households are insured, and it's much lower in North Rhine-Westphalia, for example, because this is also a federal state level. But yes, to cut it short, I mean, there is some investment now in technology. I'm pretty sure that we will be better prepared in future for such events, but you never know if the events will just be the same. Might be it's a different event, and then the problem again starts. But yes, but what I see is really, I mean, we still rely too much on technology. We were talking about transformative adaptation. We were talking about local knowledge. And I think in Germany, we also should talk about perception of risk, which is very, very difficult because, I mean, we are so used as a society to distribute our individual risk to others. That's basically what we do. The individual risk goes to insurance companies. The individual risk goes to the government, to a taxpayer who pays for dikes, what have you. And we are not really able to deal with our own risks of life because you always have this kind of protection pillows everywhere. And then if it actually comes down to individual behavior, we actually have to deal with that. And I think I really like your distinguishing between stress and shocks. So basically shocks in Germany and stress in Indonesia. And I think this comes with consequences because if it's a shock event, then you're not prepared. You're much, much better prepared if it's a kind of a daily stress experience. If it's a daily stress experience, you know what risk means. If it's a shock, you're always overwhelmed by a risk that you usually distribute to others. And all of a sudden, you have to deal with it yourself. But it also comes with an erosion of livelihoods, maybe in stress situations, whereas shock situations are completely different. Usually, our economy grows after a shock. because the money comes into the region from the central government, from international investment. So this shock experience very often is positively economically in the long term, not in the short term, but in the longer term, where stress tends to erode livelihoods on a daily basis. I think these are quite different. And I was then intrigued to think about what does climate change bring to European countries when the shocks turn to stress, because we experience that much more often. And then we could also come into a situation where we have this erosion of livelihoods, which we don't experience today, because you can be quite certain that you will have a hard time during a crisis, you will have a hard time directly in the aftermath after a crisis, but in long term, it creates economic growth. And I think this could be quite interesting to look at it from this direction, but we are talking about the same thing, I guess, nature-based solutions, transformative adaptation, local knowledge, much better here than probably in Germany. But I think this is the way to go. We also need technology, no doubt about it. And even I, as a non-engineer, would actually will tell you that. But I mean, I think it's very, very important that we look at it from the lower levels of decision making. That seems to be a very similar story, even though the impacts are different.
Oh, sorry.
I thank you for the presentation. First of all, my name is Wira. I'm one of the undergraduate students in here in Undip. I would like to ask this question to Professor Braun, Boris, sorry, because your presentation gave me an understanding about how now I look Germany and Indonesia are the same. Like we have the same problem. Even the politicians are probably have the same behavior like what they did here. I was wondering about the 60 years gap between the 1962 flood. I guess that occurs in Hamburg, right? And it's in the northern side of Germany, where I guess it's due to the coastal problem and there's about the sea also impacted from the sea, and different with the 2021 that was just impacted. It's affected because of the storms. I guess the burn storm, right? That's occur in the whole of the Europe. What actually missed by the German government in the 60 years gap? I mean, in Indonesia, in our planning regulation, and we create the special plan in every 20 years. In the 60 years, that could make like 3 documents. What have been missed in those 60 years, and what could have been done better in the 60 years gap? I mean, recently in West Java, we have a tornado that looks like in US, and people here are not really prepared for any tornadoes. Even the structures, they're having a really great damage infrastructures there because they're not prepared. Now I'm looking at similarity between what happened in Germany and Indonesia. I mean, what can we study from the 60 years gap, and what could we do to prevent such thing occurs in here? And yeah, probably I was wondering about that because let's say about the GDP, the Germans have like the 3 times much more than the GDP, but the German also could have failure. So what I guess money is not the problem here, and we have the same problems. Yeah, I guess that's it. And is there any perspective from you, like maybe we here see how we conquer the stresses, or maybe it's just like normal things, but is there any German perspective that is like when you see what we did here is like, oh, it's actually something good to be implemented in Germany? Yeah, I guess that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think certainly a lesson that we can take home to Germany is that people here know what they are doing in times of course, if there's a tornado, if you know experience with tornado, this creates no problems. But from my view, I mean, people here are much better informed what they can do individually to protect themselves, how to find a way to live with these stressors. Because I mean, you know what you're doing, and you have enough, you always gain experience because the frequency is quite high of these events. It is more stress than shock. I think that's actually we can learn. So especially how to deal with this risk perception, how to become into a situation where you can act responsibly and you know what you're doing, and you don't have to wait for the government to tell you what you have to do, because then it might be too late in a stress situation. But that's certainly something we can learn. But there are so many similarities. I mean, it's always obviously also a question of equality or inequality, because these events impact some people but not others. How do you deal with that? I think that's certainly the same thing. We are talking now about swamp cities, Chinese concept originally, but now also popular in Indonesia and in Europe, to keep water into the vegetation, to decrease runoff through rivers. So we basically have the same approach, the same concepts, but I think your advantage is that your education about how to behave starts much earlier than ours. And it's more effective. I think this is something because you can actually learn. If you're looking back for the last 60 years, so 62, there's the big flood from Hamburg, and you're completely right. It was a very different situation because it was basically water coming from the North Sea going up the Elbe River, where this was a more local rainfall event in 2021. And then it's very hard to transform the the logic, how you to do your management system from one event to another, because they're all different, which makes it even more complex. But I would say the learning, and interestingly, all these major flood events, Hamburg, later the Rhine and the Elbe floods, we had a change in government every time after these after these events, or we have completely changed situation of the political context with almost all these flood events. So the learning from 62 was technology, building dikes, having building flood-prone buildings. Then the learnings from the 90s and the early 2000s was maybe it's a spatial planning problem. We are allowed to build up areas in the wrong places. And what we now learn now, I think it's about communication. So it tends to be a different learning outcome every time we experience such a shock. So first, technology, structural buildings, dikes. Second was planning problems to make better master planning, better zonal planning. And now it seems to be, the lesson seems to be about communication between different levels of government, different stakeholders, and the government and the local population. But you're totally right. Every shock is different. And that's maybe, again, the difference between shock and stressor. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. We also have one question from our Zoom attendees to Boris. Actually, one question that fits quite nicely to what you just said, so I wanted to add this just in. So the question really is, or the impression. Oh yeah, there we have it. Thank you very much. So what you just said with the lessons that have been learned, that it was not necessarily a technological issue, it was mostly about communication. And the question would be, if we have now this lesson, what has been done actually to improve the situation, to scale up the resilience and the preparedness of the local population in Germany, or especially in those areas, and especially regarding to social capital, maybe collective action in that sense?
I would say on the technological side, there are some changes to improve communication. Certainly, we now have a mobile phone system that actually gives you an automatic warning in such situations. Also, the German Weather Service, I think, learned the lesson that it's not about rainfall figures, it's about the potential impact that people have to know. I'm not so sure about the self-helping capacities. There I don't see that many changes. I mean, people are talking about that, but what I would like to see is that it's a part of the school curriculum. Especially if you know, in like places in Cologne, our problem is always flood of the Rhine River, or it's heat waves in midsummer. It's very predictable. These are two problems. There might be a tornado, yes, there could be one, but it's very unlikely that that's happened to a larger scale. So we actually know the kind of dangers that we could face, and I don't see too many changes there. But I would say yes, on the technological side, there is quite some development, but much less so on the local or individual adaptation side of things. I'm not so optimistic about this. And you can actually repeat yourself all the time. always telling the same story. And I think a point is, and that's also certainly applies also to Indonesia, it's much easier to invest for a politician to invest in massive infrastructure, in communication systems, technological change, than to do this hard work of small scale changes. That's less attractive for decision makers. And I think that's one of the reasons why I can't see it really happen. And we have school, so for example, there are tests now with what we got from America, these mass shootings at primary schools, high schools. There are now plans to deal with that, but we don't still, to my knowledge, still don't have plans and a part of the curricula that actually address these more natural disaster events. And if you would ask Germans, I mean, effectively, we have, in some years, we have about 6,000 people dying during heat waves in summer. And it's still not a topic for mass media. It's still not a topic in a broader society. It's much more like expert knowledge. Even so, we know this. I mean, that heat waves are a massive problem. And you don't have to be a climate change expert to expect more heat waves in Central Europe in future. And still, it's not a big topic. So now we are thinking over what is the information the city government should give you how to deal with 1 week of very high summer temperatures. And this is a good example because there's some easy ways out. You can actually do it. It's not rocket science, but still we are missing this information transfer between an expert, the everyday kind of behavioral knowledge of people. But I think it's a system problem because it's always more attractive to invest in dikes, in forecasting systems, and so on.
Good morning, Professor Boris and Professor Wiwi. It was really a pleasure to hear both of your presentation today. And concerning about climate change, risk reduction, and resilience, it has been really going around my mind, especially this semester. For me, it's really interesting to know and like dig deeper about resilience, both in Indonesian context and in Germany. So my question is, I have two questions actually. The first one, Prof. Wiwi before mentioned about the NBS, the natural-based solution, in a way that we face climate change and how we adapt to it. Do you think that the several way of the natural-based solution can be implemented in Germany, especially along the Ahr River? Because we know that Indonesia is a tropical country and some of the NBS solution cannot be implemented in Germany. So yeah, my question is, what natural-based solution that do you think it is visible to be implemented there in Germany, especially along the Ahr River, because it is impacted by flooded area and heavy rainstorm and everything? That's the first question. And for the second question is, especially as someone who taught by Prof. Wiwi in urban and regional planning, we always thought about planning in medium term and long term, especially 5 year, 10 years, and 20 years of planning. Now, what I point out in your presentation, Professor Boris, is it is conducted in 2021, the studies, and now we're touching 2024, so it means it already been 4 years ago. And from this time of 4 years, what action and what sort of implementation that already taken by the government, the local stakeholders, as well as the community preparedness, in a way to adapt in a way to face and adapt the decades events of flooding there in Ahr River. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. The question about nature-based solutions in our valley. I mean, for nature-based solutions, you need space. That's always a problem. It comes with some demand on space, and it's certainly limited in these narrow river valleys because you don't have the space do that. But it's the same problem in Indonesia. I mean, if you have a mangrove forest, you need space for a mangrove forest. A dike needs much smaller amount of space. But I think, therefore, it goes into a different direction. And probably now this idea of swamp cities is very popular. So we know that we need green space wherever we can get some space to have that, to keep water longer in the system, to have more time for evaporation, to limit the runoff through rivers. I think this is something which is happening. But what I see in the Our Valley, and it also applies to the other valleys where also these things happened, as it's now back to technical solutions. Now we hire our dikes, for example. We have this combination between roads and dikes, the same that you have here in Semarang. Also nature-based solutions, but it's the limitation of space, which is the problem. What also could be a solution would be reforestation of these vineyards. But would you really do that? I mean, a very important part of the economy is wine growing. A very important part of the local economy is tourism that comes with wine. If you lose the wine, you don't have tourists anymore. And then it gets really hard. I mean, to say very simply, yeah, replantation of forests, then you reduce runoff. I mean, no doubt about that. But then you rip away the whole kind of economic model in these areas. So it's not that easy. I mean, we can actually promote natural-based solutions, but we will always come to some limits of this approach. Then either way you look at it, I mean, you need a combination of all these different approaches. Yes, technology, yes, dikes, yes, also communication technology, also nature-based solutions. But I think we've gone too far with urban development and development settlements to actually totally rely on nature-based solutions. As much as I self-promote them all the time and constantly repeating the story, but we have to accept that there are limitations to that. And if you face these limitations, then you have to learn to live with floods, to live with these circumstances. And therefore, for this, there's much room for improvement in Germany, I guess. I mean, to actually do that. Yes, nature-based solution, but yes, also it's not always applicable. You need space to do that. Yeah, 21, of course. I mean, the empirical evidence is from 21 because the event was in 21. But as I said, just kind of repeat myself, they now have better zoning plans. Some master plans are better for urban development. We are rebuilding the infrastructure in our valley. This all happens. There's kind of this compensation for damage that people experienced. That's all going on. So there is a story after 2021. And my prediction would be that we now learn how to deal with this kind of smaller scale flood events, but we don't know what future brings, and we could face a different situation in future and rely on new learnings from there on. But I don't want to say that we are unable to react to these events. There is something going on. But we have to always prepare that the next event could be slightly or even dramatically different from the events that we experienced in the past. And it's very hard to, I mean, as I said, replantation, getting out the villages from the valley ground, it's almost impossible. I mean, it's people's property, it's people's lives, and they try to rebuild their house. Of course they do. Would you prevent them from doing that? It's very hard to do that.
Thank you, Masino, for your questions. And first of all, I'm happy when you mentioned that you are more aware with the climate change issues this semester. Yeah, just adding what Prof. Boris has mentioned about nature-based solution. Basically, when we put more attention on green element and blue element, there's always a room for nature-based solutions. That's, I think, the first things that I would like to highlight a little bit. And at the current situation, it is always important for us to combine between the gray infrastructure with this blue and green element. And I think we can do it in different ways, in different geographical setting. What I've shown you, maybe when we talk about the coastal, that's why we talk about mangrove and tree pines and so on. But I would like I haven't really mentioned about this before, but I think it's also interesting for me to share that actually the problem is not only about whether we combine this gray, blue, and green part in our intervention, but actually how we can manage to have a more comprehensive approach. Because most of the time, maybe you have experienced this before in one of your visits in Sumatra or in Jakarta or in Java, that, for example, let's say we focus on gray infrastructure, we elevate the road, but then it may solve the problem in some road area, but then it just move the problem to the other areas, because then the road is elevated, then the other areas then get the impact because the road elevation problems. What I've shown you on one of my slides when I show you like the long storage in Pekalongan, we just moved it gave a different impact between people who live in the northern side and the southern side of this long storage, because maybe it can make it can dry the area in the south, but it will make the area in the northern part even experience higher flood, higher inundation, something like that. So and also another hot conversation at the moment because of the toll road development connecting Semarang and Demak. Maybe when you go to Tambak Lorok this afternoon, you will pass through the toll road, because there are a lot of conversations saying that the toll construction will influence the direction of the wave. And in a way, it will damage the mangrove on the eastern part of the Semarang area, in the Demak area. So there are a lot of intervention has been made, the nature-based, the mangrove plantation and so on in the eastern part of Semarang. And we including my staff, because I'm not the expert on it, but I'm questioning my colleague from the other department saying whether the construction of because the toll road will have two functions as the toll road, but also as the sea dike. And we are questioning whether the construction will influence the wave direction. And the local people already afraid with the situation. It's because they already experienced the changing since the construction about 3 years ago. So what I'm trying to say is not really about talking whether we should focus on blue, green, and also combine with the gray, but how then we need to have a more integrative approach. And what like Boris mentioned, the sponge concept, already been implemented in most Chinese cities. I think it's also quite popular here, and we try to promote, and some cities already have some incremental implementation on to implement through this approach. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm addressing my question to Professor Braun. Yeah, so thank you for the nice presentation. The seminar is truly reminding me to my meeting with Professor Frauke Kras and Christine Knie, as well as with Sabine Beiswenger in Köln in 2008 during my German course in Hartnackschule in Bonn. Yeah, so nice to meet you this morning in Undip. Regarding the disaster, I think it was a horrible disaster, and I can understand why German people so shocked about this disaster, because as I know that the precipitation level in Germany is quite low, especially comparing with the equatorial regions like Indonesia. So it is understood that the people blaming and searching for the fault, people whose fault is this incidents. Yeah, so I would like to know what kind of spatial planning review or spatial planning change that has been done, in mitigate or anticipate, as you mentioned that it was possible to be happen again in the future or even in the sooner. Yeah, so I think it is urgent to make a let's say contingency plan. Yeah, because as far as I know, the spatial planning in Germany is quite rigid. Yeah, so it is not easy to change, yeah, anytime. But regarding with the mitigation needs, I think it is very urgent to be done. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, this really comes down to the German spatial planning concept and system. I mean, but in our case, so the spatial planning actually for built-up areas and also for green space is done by the city level or the district level. So the federal state has not a big stake in that, even not the central government has no stake in it. The federal state has very little stake in it. It's usually done by the communities, by the villages and by small towns, bigger towns, so on the lowest level of government. So we don't have to change really that much our national laws to that. It's more going down to these local communities, but they change their plans. So it happened in Cologne after the Rhine flooding in 93 and 95. There were no new master plans. There were new planning schemes that happens on the local level, and there is learning. There's no way to deny that. I mean, there was not a learning in the smaller river valleys because they didn't know what can happen. But as soon as such a shock happens, you will have a change in these zoning plans, and they are done on the local level. They can adapt it very quickly. Yes, the planning system is very rigid. We have a lot of, say, parameters they have to follow and they have to regulate. But on the other hand, they can do it locally. So I don't see this as a major problem. So if you have this local experience, you can right away change your planning, not a planning system, but your zoning plan. And this is what many communities, many towns and cities are now doing or started to do already in the 1990s. This was something I would name this the second phase of learning, first technology and then changing local planning schemes. Yes, it's rigid, but it's up to the locality. So it's very, very effective system. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about that they take the right decisions, but I'm not worried at all about a system that allows this every time. So they can change their master plan, what we call Flächennutzungsplan. That's for the whole government area, local government area. And they could also do the smaller regulation, what we call Bebauungsplan, which is for small areas. And you can have a lot of parameters where you actually can very closely control that. So I wouldn't say that's a problem of the planning system. It's a problem of the plan. The plan has to be right, not the planning system.
I mean spatial plan or even.
Yeah, I mean spatial planning. Yeah, I mean we have a two-stage urban planning, spatial urban planning schemes, and they are pretty flexible and they are decided on the lowest level of government, which can be very right to the point of your problems. So I'm not that so. I'm skeptical in some terms, but I'm not very skeptical about the planning system that actually allows for that.
Thank you for the opportunity. So what I want to ask, first, I want to kind of make an analogy. So there's a book that's called Black Swan. That's where a phenomena that usually a swan is white, right? But a black swan, it's something that people have never occurred to their mind that it's gonna happen. So, and if we compare this to the definition of risk, it's where a serious consequence is subject to uncertainty. So it's whether we have something to manage it or we leave it. And I think we are encountering this black swan more and more in the future. And from what I understand by comparing the two cases, I've come to some kind of framework. Whereas in Germany, in terms of government, they're over-regulated. So it comes to a rigid communication, whereas in Indonesia, they are under-regulated, and that made us to be local adaptive, capacity reliant. And if we take a look at the infrastructure in Indonesia, we are refusal to the early warning systems and maybe other more technological, so that maybe refutes any investment coming, or maybe prevent it. And while in Germany, they have technical preparedness, but that doesn't suffice, as is evident by the past incident. And if we take a look at the physical, they are very unexpected, as was in that 2021 incident, where it is water saturated and the river is, everyone didn't know that it's already low performance in handling this kind of unexpected situations. That something similar has occurred in Indonesia a few years back in Palu. I think it's quite similar as in Palu liquidification. That's similar, that we did not know that it's gonna happen. And if we take a look at the climatic situations, we're gonna face harsher conditions in the future as we grow closer and closer to the 1.5 degrees Celsius increment growth. So there are two solutions that I've heard and proposed. The first one is the lateral government, academic, and public dissemination, or scientific communication, better communication overall as a systemic communication. Or we go with the pathways of overcautious spatial planning, where maybe there's some consequences that I think of. Maybe if Indonesia, it will be forcing migration for the marginalized people or indigenous people. Whereas for the Germany, they might, if what you say is spatial planning matters, that will be limiting economic growth on the degree that how can we suffice to these uncertainties that we face? How we'll be overcautious to this maybe uncertainties that's gonna be maybe more relevant in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a part of our national identity that we are cautious. So Germans have to be cautious. Germans are not risk takers. Germans try to distribute risk. So it's, for us, it's very hard I would even don't say it's not overcautious. I mean, it's certainly very cautious, our planning system, but we were cautious about the wrong things, because we learned we have to be cautious in our planning scheme, say for industrial pollution into residential areas, from transport pollutions into, I mean, we're very cautious about that, but we weren't much cautious about natural events, natural hazards. So this is something we have to learn. Yes, I mean, I think we have to accept that we have a population who is not very risk-taking, is very risk-adverse. I mean, it's so deep in our national identity. I can't change that. And even I can talk now about risks, but I'm the same. So we can't transform that. So I think we have to be cautious, maybe overcautious, and we have to take economic disadvantage because we are too cautious. That will remain, but our cautiousness should be more targeted, and now more targeted to new incidents, to new issues that come up with climate change. I think that's a transformation. And so I wouldn't say it's too bureaucratic. It's the way we are, but I think we have to live with this more kind of bureaucratic solutions, because the second characteristics of us is not only that we are not risk takers, we also always care about equality, treating people equally. And if you do that, your tax system, it gets more and more complicated because it's more and more overburdened. And we sometimes even face a situation that we are so cautious and so bureaucratic and so concerned about equality that we create new inequality because we are such cautious people. So I don't think we can change this basically, but we have to focus on the right fields. And what we now see with climate change, with a rapidly transforming world, there are new fields that we have to deal with our planning system. And see, I've come across as a very laid back, neutral observer of these things, but it's not true. Actually, I'm a dreamer, and I dream of something And what we now want to do in projects that we just submitted our proposals will be a European project on how combining nature conservation with flood protection, with having protected areas with green spaces, swamp city concepts. And so I think we have to actually see all these different solutions that we find, and we can be dreamers, and we have to force ourselves to be dreamers sometimes and to take risks. But we should do this. But we have to do this, of course, within our planning regulation system. So it's always the risk if you have to deal with new problems, there's can be a tendency to override your traditions of planning. I think this wouldn't be good advice for us to do. So we will live with bureaucracy, we'll live with this risk-averse approach that we have, but it should be more targeted. So I don't see this so too much as a systemic problem.
Just a very short additional comment, yeah, Mas. Interesting when you mention about more or underregulated. Yeah, I just want to say that I think in my perspective in Indonesian context, we not really underregulated. We mostly, maybe I can say we have too many regulation, but the problem is sometimes it is overlapping each other. So sometimes some regulation may against other regulation, something like that. So I think we need to really aware on that, yeah, in the more in the governance perspective. Yeah, please. I think this should be our last.
Yeah. Okay. So, but this will be then the last from the audience from the Zoom attendees. Okay. So yeah. Then we have one more question from a Zoom attendee from Arizal in Purwokerto. I will actually hijack this question a little bit. So the central part is which best early warning system from Germany could be put into place as soon as possible in Indonesia. But I would like actually to open up this question to both speakers and ask if learning from these different contexts, like transferring technology would be one thing. I think that really the question could be what can be learned from each other from different contexts. So we see Germany very high regulated, high technology, high capacity, but still failing in high emergency situations, whereas we see in Indonesia a situation of high exposure, sometimes limited state capacities, but a very high ability of social capacities, for example, to deal with itself. So not only talking about the technological aspect, but both of you, maybe the question like what can be learned from looking at those two contexts together?
Yeah, I guess we can learn a lot from Indonesia, but the most striking point to me is educate people as early as possible for the possibly unseen. I think this is really a learning, and that should start in school. That's also, say, a plea to my own discipline to put this in the school curriculum, that you actually train people on a constant basis, of course, but to start this education as early as possible, that people are better prepared to help themselves in a situation where the state and technology can't help them anymore. I think it's a very important point. And this is something we can certainly learn from Indonesia, and maybe then also be a little bit more relaxed when it comes down to regulation. That could also be a learning, but it's simply the education question, I guess. It's a very important one. And that's something where we can do something. I can't build a dam, but I could try to make education a little bit better.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to give like 2 points for this closing part. The first one is I like to remind all of us that this is not really about apple to apple comparisons, right? Because the types of the disaster, the typical of the people, the geographical setting is very different. And but in a way, we of course we can learn each other. And it's interesting when Prof. Boris, Pak Boris said about the way we understand such disturbance, maybe from German's perspective, it becomes a shock, but from our perspective, it becomes a stress. And the way we react also becomes different because our mindset about the disturbance is also different. And I agree that technology, it becomes, of course, an important solution, but in a way, like you have mentioned before, and also I've emphasized a little bit in my last presentation that to ensure the sustainable solution, then the local engagement, the local people is also important. So maybe it's also interesting what Pak Agung Sugiri has asked you about the social capital. Maybe in a way, this strengthening the social capital in German case maybe also become an important, while maybe in Indonesian case, maybe we have not really a lot of high technology, but in a way, the social cohesion maybe in certain area could be stronger and become like the important part in promoting such a local initiative. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you. Thank you.
Then thank you very much to all the questions and to the speakers for answering them. So we're now coming to a closing of this seminar to really summarize the most important take-home messages that we saw today. I think what is true, we have to deal with very different geographical contexts, terms of exposure, vulnerability. But speaking about these issues, like the same points always run up again. One thing comes out, like technology is important, but it's not everything. And one thing that shines through is that we should avoid an over-reliance on singular systems, that there is a necessity to integrate solutions, for example, through nature-based solutions, sponsority approaches, but nonetheless also an active role of both the states and the population, where we see different degrees in Germany and in Indonesia. So we're really talking about agency, individual agency, state agency, but also in terms of risk knowledge, using of local knowledge, and not least preparedness, albeit in education or in disaster early warning systems, etc. So really, for the future, I think the most important things is like, how can we improve those challenges that we're still facing, challenges of communicating, of sharing knowledge, but also introducing higher capacities for both states and self-help capacities for population. And yes, with this, I thank everybody very much for their attention. And this was a very nice seminar. And yeah, wish you all a pleasant day.
Thank you very much, Konstantin.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation and the discussion, Professor Boris and Professor Wiwi. And also thank you for Mr. Konstantin for moderating this session. Before we close this event, we would like to say thank you for the support from the honorable guest lecturer today. We are very honored to have with us here this morning. And also for documentation purpose, we invite all participation here to take the document, and also in Zoom meeting, maybe Pak Imam can help us to take a screenshot. Oh. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. And also please, Prof. Iwi, to give some gift souvenir.
Brought a large suitcase with me. Oh, thank you very much. Beautiful. Wow. This is something worth a photo. Yeah, what's this? That's for you. Yeah, that's our university logo. These are the three holy kings visiting Jesus Christ and his mother Maria. So it's a very old university from the 14th century, and you can actually see the 14th century logo. Because the relics of the holy kings are in our cathedral, those cathedrals. What we think are relics of them. There's a very big cathedral, and the major treasure in there are the relics from these three holy kings that we stole from Italy. Yeah, thank you.
No information from the logo.
What color? Yeah, no, I have. Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. And this event about to come to the very end. I hope you found the presentation today are informative and helpful, and we hope that this event will bring an inspiration and a positive impact for all of us. Please forgive us for our shortcomings. We look forward to seeing you in the next international lecture series. I hope you all have a good day. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.